U.S. trade volume actually is still increasing. And the export amount from China to the United States as a percentage of China's total export to the world is decreasing rapidly. Right now it's about 13% compared with the peak at about 25%. That means China is exploring other markets in other parts of the world to substitute for whatever loss of its export to the United States. However, I think weaponizing tariff is the wrong thing to do because you really undermine free trade. And for the United States to defend free trade is absolutely the most important thing. And for China to defend free trade while the United States wants to wreck the free trade is becoming the megatrend of the world. China now is the standard bearer of defending free trade. I hope the United States will overcome.
当西方记者还在纠结中国是否把供应链武器化时，高志凯抛出了一个让全场愣住的判断：关税战是特朗普打错的战争，中国才是自由贸易的旗手。高志凯没有回避中国威胁论的指控，而是直接把历史账本摊开。2012年，中国压住电动车时，没人确定能成；日本压了氢能源没压中，你不能怪中国有远见。更狠的是他对 AI 的定调 ，AI 不是美国智能，封闭源代码搞垄断是灾难配方。中国推开源，降门槛，3-5年内开源将成为主流。
On any given day in Washington, you can hear two polar opposite positions. The first is that China is a threat, and that it's going to eclipse the United States in global trade and in artificial intelligence and take over Taiwan sooner rather than later. Does China see the West's ambivalence as an opportunity to expand further? Victor, thank you so much for joining us here again at the Doha Forum. We were together 1 year ago. It was a great show and a great discussion.
Thank you.
And at that time, we were right on the verge of Donald Trump possibly, being elected, and you said China is not afraid of Donald Trump. What's happened in the last year? Is China still not afraid of Donald Trump? Do you see opportunities in Donald Trump, or do you see disaster?
President Donald Trump is the President of the United States of America and the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. military. In that capacity, President Trump commands my highest respect. And we may have some differences, but the differences don't count in dealing with the President of the United States. Now, I would say after he reassumed the leadership role in the United States on January the 20th, 2025, he played his role in different ways, causing different impact on the world, especially as far as China is concerned. The tariff war he launched against China as well as against the rest of the world most likely will prove to be the wrong war for him to launch because it does not serve any constructive purpose. I hope the tariff war will be brought to an end very quickly and President Trump and his team can devote their resources on other things which truly matter. For example, bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, which I will completely wholeheartedly support. And China can really make itself of great use to the United States if the United States really decides to do that.
Where do you think the tariff war is now?
Despite of all this pressure and vicissitudes, the total China-US trade volume actually is still increasing. And the export amount from China to the United States as a percentage of China's total export to the world is decreasing rapidly. Right now it's about 13% compared with the peak at about 25%. That means China is exploring other markets in other parts of the world to substitute for whatever loss of its export to the United States. However, I think weaponizing tariff is the wrong thing to do because you really undermine free trade. And for the United States to defend free trade is absolutely the most important thing. And for China to defend free trade while the United States wants to wreck the free trade is becoming the megatrend of the world. China now is the standard bearer of defending free trade. I hope the United States will overcome whatever problems it has and again defend free trade together with China.
I think a lot of people who are critics of China or critics of this situation that the United States and China find itself believe that China, basically to use the term you did, weaponized supply chains, weaponized strategic predatory targeting of industries. What they're basically arguing is that China created a strategy, pursued it, and tried on its own to decrease its own dependencies on the rest of the world and has been remarkably successful. And that in EVs and batteries and critical materials, China has an extraordinary stranglehold, if you will, upwards of 80 and 90% market share that now the United States and even Europe are trying to catch up with. So to some degree, is China and is the situation a victim of China's success at being so good at being able to strategically target industries it wanted to dominate and to be in And now that's created a fear that that free trade system just didn't work out right in terms of balance.
Well, allow me to put EV car industry in historical perspective. Around 2012, when China decided to really put all the resources in developing this new sector, at that time, it was not certain at all that electric vehicle industry will be a splashing success, because at that time, lots of uncertainties in terms of the technologies, in terms of the supply chain.
Well, I remember I drove
cetera.
one of the first BYD vehicles in like 1997.
Really? Okay.
It was one of the test sites, and I knew it was going to be big.
Well, you are a visionary. You were a visionary then, and hopefully you will remain very optimistic about this industry. But China really took a big bet. Why? Because China wants to do the right thing to mitigate the impact of the climate change and the CO2 emission, etc. China wants to cut down its dependence on imported oil, crude oil. That's the driver for China's exploration of this EV car revolution. And China came up with an overarching view about how this industry should be done and what should be the prospect and how the supply chain should be structured or restructured. So you can say China has the vision and has the wisdom and has the courage to place such a big bet on the EV car industry, which in China's belief will really reduce the dependence on fossil fuel, which is what China really cares about. Now China turns out to be right. Other countries placed similar bets. For example, Japan placed a big bet on hydrogen car, which didn't materialize. So you cannot blame China for being visionary as well as very wise in placing the bet. And now China's production of EV cars already succeeded China's production of fossil fuel cars. And China's goal is to push the EV car production up to about 100% of all the vehicles produced in China.
Let me ask you a big question, Victor, and I ask it of many military leaders, foreign policy leaders, and political leaders in the United States. Why does it matter so deeply who wins the AI race?
Well, I think AI revolution is not only with us, it is going to shape and change everything we do as individuals, as families, as cultures, as civilizations, you name it. And I think several things stand out very sharply to me. First of all, AI is not American intelligence. Most people don't know that or don't want to figure that out. Secondly,
what do you mean by that?
Well, I think the way the Americans are building up their AI dominance is kind of in the belief that they should turn AI into American intelligence, which is not true. Secondly, for any country to really achieve AI dominance will be a recipe of great disaster for humankind, because
even China?
For even China, just imagine any country building up AI dominance. What will it do? It probably wants to dictate to all the other countries, and that will really change the way we understand about sovereignty and the independent rights of nations, for example. Therefore, I think from the Chinese perspective, first of all, AI is not American intelligence. Secondly, AI should be open sourced rather than closed sourced. Therefore, AI should be developed in such a way that all countries should have a chance to participate. No AI dominance should be allowed. And then AI should not be hugely expensive, and the threshold should be lower and lower rather than higher and higher. And that is the way China is developing its AI. And I truly believe in a matter of 3 or 5 years to come, mankind should know very well the megatrend in the AI, which will be open sourced. Right. And I urge the American friends to really abandon the closed sourced way of developing AI. I think China and the United States are in the top league in terms of pushing the edge of the envelope as far as AI is concerned. And neither country is way ahead of the other country by any measurable means. And I think Mr. Jensen Huang of NVIDIA is probably right. If China's behind the United States, it's probably just by an iota, a nanosecond behind the United States. And the fact that he keeps saying that top AI professionals are more than 50% Chinese from everywhere, mainland China, Taiwan, Malaysia, the United States, etc., does have a profound meaning. That is, the mind of the Chinese people using Chinese characters for thousands of years probably are better trained and better equipped to understand AI in the abstract sense of the word. And then the fact that China is producing about 3 million engineers of all kinds every year, putting them into this large pool of talents in China, many of whom are well trained for the AI revolution, means that if any country wants to push China down in terms of the AI revolution, probably they will fail. Working with China is the better way.
Let me change gears here and ask you about some foreign policy and national security issues. So in Washington, the national security strategy of the Trump administration was released as a report. China is mentioned 21 times in that document. Europe is mentioned a lot more as a concern point. And I was surprised, to be honest, given the level of hyperventilation in America about China, the China challenge, and what people call the defining challenge for the United States in this era is China, but how level-headed the tone was with China, that it was not the end of the world, that they were not wrapped up believing that a war with China would ensue in 2027 over Taiwan. So I'm just interested in your take on how you read the National Security Strategy document, and were you as surprised as I was?
No, not at all. I have the English version as well as the Chinese version of the National Strategy.
Are they similar?
I think comparing the two versions, they are very close to each other.
Okay.
I think President Trump and his government made the right decision to avoid what Professor Paul Kennedy of Yale History Department said in his book, The Rise and Fall of Great Power, overreach. I think the United States has been overreaching for decades and probably has reached a point where it realizes that it does not have infinite resources to continue to practice overreach. And eventually you need to pull back.
You see overreach as encircling China, as, a string of pearls, right? Containing China?
Overreaching in many senses of the word, for example, try to police the whole world, try to launch one war after another to achieve its strategic goal, which eventually is not sustainable by any stretch of the imagination, and try to be more realistic and pragmatic, and also try to, for example, defend free trade, defend peace rather than using war as the first priority, should probably better serve the fundamental interests of the American people. Now, between China and the United States, I firmly believe in what I call the inevitability of peace between China and the United States, which is a kind of...
The inevitability of peace.
Inevitability of peace between China and the United States, meaning whether you like it or not, whether you like China or hate China, or dislike China, you cannot use war to achieve your goal. Eventually, you need to come to terms with China as a megatrend and solve whatever problems there are, which are plenty, in peaceful means, through diplomacy, negotiation, for example, to avoid war rather than embracing war. Because I think the inevitability of peace is kind of a rebuke of the destined for war scenario coming up by Professor Graham Allison of Harvard.
Sure.
If that theory, the Thucydides trap theory, is applied to China and the United States, why? Let me get 1 minute of your time. Because Professor Graham Allison very artfully analyzed many cases of war and came up with this excellent theory of Thucydides trap. But he forgot to tell mankind that all the cases of war he analyzed so carefully were conventional wars. But if you want to apply the theory derived therefrom to China and the United States, two very large nuclear power states, something must be wrong. So I came up with this inevitability of peace theory, because I truly believe war should be absolutely avoided between China and the United States, because if you instigate a war between China and the United States in conventional war terms, it will soon get out of control and escalate from conventional war into non-conventional war. And that probably will spell the doom for mankind. And it will be Armageddon in a sense. So I talk about inevitability of peace to anyone who has an ear.
Chinese media often said Taiwan's return to China is an important part of the post-war international order. When does the invasion begin?
Well, I don't think there will be invasion. First of all...
How about a blockade?
First of all, the exact status of the relations across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait is well dictated by what's in the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, which became the pillars upon which the international war after defeating Nazi Germany and imperialist Japan.
Do you think everyone remembers that origin story?
Well, if anyone forgets, I want to bring them back into historical knowledge about the two pillars of the post-war international order. Because these two monumental documents dictated that Japan, which was occupying Taiwan since 1895, should return Taiwan to China. which it did after it unconditionally surrendered. Ever since then, there has been only one China, and Taiwan being part of China. Of course, there have been separatists in Taiwan who want to push the edge of the envelope, but they will never succeed.
But back to your inevitability of peace, there is a little bit of turmoil about this. Sanae Takaichi, the Japanese prime minister, may not have that early memory, and there's been a real heating up, extraordinary heating up of Chinese-Japanese tensions. So I'm interested in what you see happening. What do you think happened in that call?
I think Wall Street Journal has the better version of what happened between President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi. But now you mentioned Prime Minister Takaichi. Allow me to mention some of my observations. I think it is the first time for a sitting Prime Minister of Japan, since Japan unconditionally surrendered in 1945, to threaten war against another country. And in this case, she threatened war against China. So you need to understand the historical context in which she made that contact. I think Prime Minister Takaichi represents a particular group of people in Japan who want to turn the table on the verdicts of the Japanese unconditional surrender. Japan unconditionally surrendered in 1945 to the United States, to China, to Soviet Union, which joined the war against Japan in the last minute, and against Great Britain. No one should ever allow Japan to turn the table on the verdict, which was carved in stone about its unconditional surrender. And I want to tell everyone in the United States, remember Pearl Harbor. Don't forget Pearl Harbor. Don't forget the atrocities the Japanese imperialists and fascists committed against the American people, the American soldiers, officers, as well as soldiers, for example, and the 35 million people they killed in China alone. So I think China and the United States, despite of all our differences, should unite in one thing: never allow Japan to become militaristic or fascist again, because you never know what they will be up to once they regain some kind of military superiority.
So Xi Jinping called President Trump called Prime Minister Takaichi. Is the problem solved?
I hope so, but you never underestimate what the American neo-fascists may cook up with. I think there are several things, very, very dangerous, and I hope the Americans and the Chinese people will unite in doing this. Now, they are talking about building hundreds of nuclear weapons, which will be absolutely not allowed. And they are talking about weaponizing outer space, because they say if we have prohibitions on militarization on the surface of the earth or in the waters, then we can weaponize outer space. No, China and the United States should never allow Japan to weaponize the space. They want to destroy communication satellites in case of emergencies, for example. I think China and the United States, based on our collective experience of joining hands in hands, fighting shoulder to shoulder, back to back, against the Japanese imperialists, should never allow remilitarization of Japan, and should never allow Japan to destroy the ironclad verdict of Japan's unconditional surrender. And hopefully we should really make sure that Japan will remain as a pacifist country, devoted to peace, and never threaten war against any other country in the world.
Let me ask you this. I want to do so carefully, and we're running out of time, but I really am interested in the question of, does it matter what kind of norms and values lie behind the governance of emerging technology like AI, like quantum? There have been a lot of concerns that China has abused some of these authorities with regards to facial recognition software and various social controls, watching its public and creating systems. And I would say the United States has also been accused of abusing some of this with regards to electronic communications, intelligence, etc. But I'm just interested in you as a person, and me as a person, and our viewers as people. Should we worry about how AI might be deployed in terms of creating a new kind of control and really using technology to take any liberalism away and basically nailing down the coffin that makes it an illiberal future, the most likely future we're going to have?
Allow me to really open up my heart and tell you what really is at the bottom of my heart. I think mankind should not worry about competition between China and the United States. What we need to really worry about is whether AI eventually will declare independence from Homo sapien and eventually will rule above Homo sapien, meaning all of us. Homo sapiens, mankind as a whole, 8 billion of us all together in the world of today, will eventually be subjugated as a second-class citizen in front of the all domineering AI. I think it is time for mankind to really cooperate collectively, internationally, to avoid that scenario. Because I do not want to see my kids and future generations in my family or for mankind to become a second-class citizen ruled by the all-powerful artificial intelligence. And I think we are at the threshold. We are at a crossroad. If, for example, China and the United States really wantonly compete with each other, coming up with its own version of AI designed to destroy each other, for example, the ultimate winner will not be the United States or China. The ultimate winner will be AI itself. And that probably will be the doom, if not the beginning of the doom, for Homo sapien. We need to wake up.
当美国把中国称自由贸易破坏者时，高志凯却指出，中美贸易额仍在增长，中国对美出口占比从25%降到13%，中国正在开拓其他市场替代美国。他搬出英伟达 CEO 黄仁勋的话：“如果中国落后美国，也只差1个纳秒。”而全球顶尖 AI 人才超过50%是华人，用汉字训练几千年的大脑，更擅长理解抽象世界。但真正让全场脊背发凉的是他的 AI 末日论，不是中美竞争，而是 AI 可能宣布从人类独立，把80亿人变成2等公民。当主持人追问谁该担心时，高志凯没有选边站，而是呼吁中美合作，避免人类被 AI 统治。关于台湾，他搬出开罗宣言、波茨坦公告2根历史柱子，警告日本无条件投降的 verdict 不容翻案，甚至点名高市早苗是1945年以来首位威胁对他国开战的日本首相，呼吁中美记住珍珠港，联手防止日本再军国主义化。终极启示在于，高志凯的每一句话都在翻转西方叙事。你们说中国破坏自由贸易，他说中国是旗手；你们说 AI 要分胜负，他说 AI 要灭人类；你们说台湾是问题，他说日本才是定时炸弹。而他那句战争不是选项，和平不可避免，不是软弱，是一个看清了和时代逻辑